Hello and welcome to another exciting episode following me, Almost Immortal, as I play All the Mods 9 to the Sky. As you may have seen from the intro, I've made a few improvements. I've improved the output of sulfur dioxide, just added lots of machines on there. I did the same over here, just added more machines on for uranium oxide, which we have plenty of. But we are running quite low on hydrofluoric acid, even with these being added. They should be fine though. Just looking, we've got 225,000 fissile fuel. So, yeah, I haven't had this running in the meantime because we had far too much power up here. And I didn't want the steam to build up in here and end up blowing up. For the next part, I wanted to make an induction matrix, which is going to be used to store all of our massive amounts of power that we're going to be getting. To do this, I needed lithium dust. So to be able to do that, I've just got the liquid lithium that comes from these, the thermal evaporation plants, feeding into here a rotary condensator, which is then feeding it into these chemical crystallizers and turning the lithium into lithium dust. I've also got a second output method with bees, where I'm creating this red lithium dust. And I did that by breeding some water bees, which I then used the genes to make 5 eggs. And then I popped them in here, the water bee egg, with some alkali metals lithium and made the lithium bee egg. So I've got 5 of those going with all the upgrades. That's getting us a little bit. It's not a massive amount, but it works. But that should be enough now to make all of the parts that we need for the induction matrix. And I've also set a pattern here for each of the components to build up to it. What I want to do is make a 12 by 12 induction matrix, which should leave 10 free slots inside from each direction to fill with the induction providers and the induction cells. Hopefully, with something like 900 of these induction cells, that should be plenty of power storage. Let's jump right in. So as you can see here, I've got one big craft going, which is all of the ultimate induction cells that is going to store all of the power in our induction matrix. But this is going to take over 2 hours to finish. So let's do something else in the meantime. So looking at the quest, the next thing to get is polonium pellets, which are these. So the first thing to get on my journey to polonium is biofuel, which is just any fruit, vegetable, seed, etc. in a crusher. I've set some carrots up with a import-export bus against the crusher, and the carrots are just growing in a phytogenic insulator with all the max upgrades. So as you can see, I'm getting plenty. We're going to use this biofuel in a pressurized reaction chamber along with some hydrogen and some water to make substrate and ethylene. So I've just set the first machine up over here. I've got a cable feeding into my network, and that is exporting water, hydrogen, and biofuel. So everything just comes from one place. We'll give that power so that that can run, and that's making substrate and ethylene. Just speed that up so it goes a bit faster. There we are. Now, we just want to feed the ethylene into a rotary condensator, which I will put here. And that will turn ethylene into liquid ethylene. Next, we want to take the substrate and the liquid ethylene, and we want to put it into another pressurized reaction chamber. There we are. I'm just using an ultimate logistical transporter from Mekanism. So that's got substrate and liquid ethylene in there now. All we need to do is feed in some oxygen. I've got a full tank of oxygen here because over here, where we've made our oxygen for the fissile fuel, the tank was full. It looks like we're making so much more than we need. So I've just gone ahead and taken more and replaced it with an empty one. And the other one's full already. Power that. And that's HDPE pellets. Now we just need to make the sheets. The sheets are really easy. All you need to do is pop the HDPE pellets into an enrichment chamber. What I'll do is I'll pop a import bus underneath, grab all the pellets as they're feeding through, and then I'll set up another area where the pellets will turn into sheets. Either that, or I'll set up a pattern and we'll have them on demand. In the end, I decided to set up a pattern, so let's see if they work. There we go. So now we can make the solar neutron activator, which is what we need to be able to create polonium. Between videos, I had plutonium just feeding into here, and as you can see, I've got quite a few. Don't know how many I'm going to need moving forward, but that should be enough for now. So I've swapped out the isotopic centrifuge and put in a solar neutron activator. This needs sunlight to be able to work, so it won't work at night time, but that's fine. For now, we can turn this on, this will feed in the nuclear waste, and we'll get polonium. And then the pressurized reaction chamber will get us the pellets. Let's try. There we are, that's running. We've already got polonium going in there. We've already got pellets. So we can move on to making the fusion reactor. We're going to need a few things for this, particularly deuterium and tritium. So I'm going to start with deuterium, which just needs an electric pump with filter upgrades. I've just made a bunch of the electric pumps, and I've popped in the filter upgrades. As you can see, they're already starting to get heavy water, but that's without any power going into them, and only with the power they've got from my inventory. So first, we need to hook them up to a power source. Luckily, we've got this here. And there we are, all powered. And then we need to pull out all the heavy water and pop it into an electrolytic separator. I'll pop that just here, and then we can get a import bus to pull out all the deuterium. There we are. And then what I'll do is I'll pop some ultimate pipe upgrades in each of these just to get them to move faster. And I'll also pop in some speed and energy upgrades in each of these to get them producing faster. And as you can see, this is now making deuterium. What I'll do, feed this into the network and get it straight into our chemical drives. Just to keep things moving, I've set the gas on here to export for output 1, just for deuterium. And I've also set this here dumping excess for oxygen. This just means that it'll keep producing deuterium and pop it into our network. Let's have a check. Brilliant, look at that. This should be plenty for now, but if we do need more, we can pop some on the other sides of this here. And we've already got the pipes set up ready to feed in. Now that we've got deuterium, we can get tritium. This just needs a solar neutron activator to get. We just feed in lithium and it'll turn it into tritium. We've got lots of liquid lithium, so we'll just get a rotary condensator and we'll feed in our liquid lithium. Then we'll feed that into a solar neutron activator. Let me get it set up and I'll show you how. Here is my simple setup for tritium. We've got lithium feeding into the rotary condensator, and the tritium is getting created by the solar neutron activators. I've given this a couple of upgrades, and it's feeding a lot more in now. These 3 full, so I'll feed those into a tank, and then feed that back into the network. There's the tank. Feed the tubes in. Tritium in there. Brilliant. There we go, so that's both tritium and deuterium in the network. Nice and easy, that's just the fuel for the fusion reactor. Now we just need to build the thing and then set up some components for it to be able to activate. We need to use laser beams to kickstart it. And we need a fuel injector as well with, I think, some DT fuel. Before we can start the fusion reactor, we need polonium. Now we've got a little bit of that in here, but I've been hesitant to turn the reactor on and keep it running with the steam just building up here, because the power just keeps getting full. Luckily though, a ridiculous amount of time has passed, and the craft for the induction matrix parts has finished. And here's the structure that I've built. This is 12 by 12. As with all the others, the corners are just the induction casing parts. As with the other, it was reactor casing. Everything in the middle is just structural glass. The top and bottom I've covered in induction casing, and then I've put 2 ports here. One's going to be used for the input of power, and the other will be used for the output. What we can do now is fill up the inside with the induction cells and the induction providers. And this just goes like that. You just pop them down here like that, and they go wall to wall. If I've done the maths right, this should need about 900 induction cells, which should feed all the way up to here to this layer, the one before the last layer. Just like that. And then the induction provider goes on top. The providers are used to transfer the power, whereas the induction cells are used to store the power. I've never made one of these before, so I don't know if I'm doing it right, but we'll soon see. There we are. And then we just cover the top. And there's the particle effect. Apparently, it can now hold 1.44 PFE. Don't know how much power that is. Sounds like a lot. I guess next we pop in a flux point and a flux plug, and then we'll have all of our power from the reactor and the power reactors feeding into this, and then have all of our power for our network feeding out of it. So I've toggled this one to input because this one's got the flux point, and this one will be output, which will have a flux plug on it. I've made a new network just on here called Induction Matrix, and all of my other flux plugs are going to direct power to this, and then the flux points are all going to direct to my other network, which is going to pull from this. Now we just need to turn the reactor on and direct all the power to this. There we go. This is now generating power and holding steam. This is taking the power and feeding it over here into the induction matrix, which, look at how fast that's going up. So we should have an almost unlimited power supply. And once we've got the fusion reactor up and running, that'll give us even more power. So they should now be able to burn through all the steam, and none should build up in here. I will keep an eye on it and just make sure no damage ever gets done to it. But hopefully, once we get enough, we won't need this to be on for too long, and we can move purely to the fusion reactor. Just in case, I've also got an output here of steam feeding into my network. And this will have a buffer. So now we've also got 4.1 million steam here, with even more going in. I'll leave this to run, and we'll get the polonium going. And once we have enough, I will come back and we'll start building the fusion reactor. The reactor's been running, polonium's being made, and I got enough to be able to make all the fusion reactor parts and all the supercritical phase shifter parts. So we're well on our way to get antimatter. First thing we'll do is make the reactor. So the fusion reactor just takes this pattern here. I'll do each side and show you how it all goes together. Before building this, I've just expanded this platform out here so we've got somewhere to build everything. I'm going to put the fusion reactor here, and then I might put the supercritical phase shifter over here somewhere. This will be the outside layer. So you put one there. I've got some kivi just as temporary blocks. so we can build on, and they just go like this. And that's the rough pattern. And all we do, take all the kivy off, and that's one side. Then you just build each side just like that. It's the same on the floor as well. So it goes like that, like that, like that, like that, and like that. The rest we just fill in with reactor glass. And since that's the outside, that'll have reactor glass too. That's another side. There we go. So it looks something like that. On the top, we want to put reactor glass, just like that. And then in the center one here, we want to place the fusion reactor controller, which is where we're going to put our DT fuel injector. Then we just want somewhere to put the ports. So I've made 5 fusion reactor ports. One is going to be for deuterium, one is going to be for tritium, another one for water, that's our inputs. And then outputs, we've got power and then steam. The water is going to create steam, which we can then throw into the turbine and result in more power. Let's finish this off and see if it works. Pop in the reactor glass and poof, that's on. Brilliant. So these are all set to inputs, and then we'll set these to outputs. I'm also going to pop in a laser focus matrix here, which is what's going to jumpstart our reactor to begin with. If we look at this quest here, frickin' laser beams, we need to give it 400 MFE, which will essentially just jumpstart it. It gets it going, and then it'll look something like that. To do that though, we're going to need, first of all, a laser amplifier, which is this here. This is where we point the lasers to. And then we need maybe 3 lasers. What we need to do is have this red bit here pointing inwards. So all we need to do is point the lasers at this. And I've just used some kivy to place those. And then finally, we just need to provide it power, which we can do from our shiny new induction matrix. There we go. You can tell that's working because the red lasers are shining in. And when this charges up to 400 MFE, it'll jumpstart. I'm going to turn it off for now because we don't need it to do that just yet. First, we need to make one of these. A Hohlraum. I think that's how you say it. Don't know. But we need gold dust and coal in a metallurgic infuser. There we are. Now we just need to make a chemical infuser to inject the fuel into it. So I've just set the chemical infuser up in the corner here. I've popped the Hohlraum in the middle here. And then I'm just gonna... I've popped the Hohlraum in the middle here. And I've got 2 export buses feeding into 2 separate chemical tanks. One for deuterium and one for tritium. There we go. That's feeding in. And that's creating DT fuel. And we already have enough to jumpstart our fusion reactor. So all you do, you pop this in here, and then when this jumpstarts with 400 MFE, it will turn it on. And as long as we've got some tritium and deuterium feeding in, we should be able to keep it up and running. I'll move those very same chemical tanks over here, feed the network over, and export the deuterium and tritium into these. And then I'll feed it in. I'll get some water fed into this one, and then once it's set up, I'll show you what that looks like. And that's the fusion reactor setup. There's the deuterium going in, there's the tritium going in, and I've set up the sink similar to the fission reactor, and I've got water feeding in. Now I just need to add power, get this to jumpstart, and we'll see where we're at. One thing I forgot to add in was the laser amplifier here can continually shoot power directly to your fusion reactor. Or, if we right click on it, we can set a minimum amount of power that it's going to generate before it shoots the power in. What we want to do is set that to 400 MFE, which I have done, and it'll power up until there's 400 MFE in there, and then it'll send that to here, which will give it a quick jump using the DT fuel that's in here, and then it'll turn on. I'm going to sit and wait, and hopefully we'll catch the starting of this on our recording, and then you'll see what it looks like. I also need to check whether or not we've got enough Deuterium and Tritium being made, because it might be that we need to improve our current setup to make it better. Until then, let's see what happens. We're almost ready to see this tick over. 398. 399. And when it hits 400, it should jumpstart it. There we go, and look at that. Nice and quick. Pops on. As you can see there, Deuterium and Tritium is in. So I believe when this powers up, it takes a little while for it to get going. And the longer it's on, the faster it goes to generate power. The water's gone in there, and we can see it's already generating steam. And what I've done is I've got steam outputting into here, and then feeding into the network. I've popped an extended import bus to try and pull it in as quick as possible, and let's put several of these acceleration cards on and see how quick that can pull it out. So we're still making more deuterium than we're using. We're making more tritium as well than we're using, so we could turn this up. It goes up to 98 as a max. And let's see how much it's using now. I'm still making more. Brilliant. So we can just leave this running, and if we have a quick look. So I've just taken the flux point off this because we don't need to power this anymore. Hopefully we won't need to jump it again. And I've also opened bypass limit on this so that we can transfer all that power. It looks like we're making almost 4 million FE per tick. While I was waiting for it to power up, I also created 2 quantum entangle porters for the steam. And one's there, one's up there. And what I'll do is, at some point, I'll open this up to take steam from here and feed it up to there. In the meantime, though, I want to keep this reactor running, the fission one, because I want to make some polonium and pop it in the Supercritical Phase Shifter. So the next step is to create the Supercritical Phase Shifter so that we can make antimatter. I've got all the parts together. I'll build the frame and show you how that works. It's almost the same shape as the Fusion Reactor, just slightly different. I think I'm just going to build it here where it's easily accessible to the polonium. And you just start with the casings like that. And there we are. That's one side, which you get rid of the kivvy. And then it's just a matter of building it out, just like that on each side. And there we are. That's the outline of it. All the outside here is structural glass with a couple of imports. So we want a port down here for input and a port for output. Polonium goes in, antimatter comes out. And then we'll fill the rest in with structural glass. And then we'll have the middle one there on either side with an SPS port. Just like that. And that'll be where the supercharged coils go. Just need to fill the rest in. And there we go. I'm going to pop a flux point on either side of these. And that's just going to power the structure. And then we want to put polonium into here. Just like that, and that's making antimatter. And then we want to output that into a chemical crystallizer, like this. And we just need to configure this port as an output. There we go. We'll make this a little bit faster. And then finally, this just wants some power. And we've already got 2 antimatter pellets. So easy when you break down all the steps. Hard to believe how much we've got. While we're here, let's have a quick look at our power. We're currently using more than we're putting in, and that'll be because it takes 400 MFE just for each of the sides of the SPS. So we might have to turn that off in a bit just to make sure things keep going. But we do have 2 TFE. Now an easy thing to do would be pop a chest here or feed it straight in using an import bus. I've limited this to 800,000 FE per tick on either side, and as you can see, it's still going up insanely fast. It just takes a little while for these to go up. I'll pop the antimatter in the network, give it somewhere to go in a drawer, and then I'll just let this tick along. That's all of the advanced mechanism steps complete. We have an induction matrix, which is this up here. We have the fission reactor, which is this part here. We've got plutonium and polonium. We've got a fusion reactor. And we've got a supercritical phase shifter, which has converted our polonium into antimatter. And then we've created antimatter pellets. That's another step on the star completed. So the last thing we need as part of the mechanism is just a gravitational modulating unit. I need 16 of these to get the 16 stars we're after. But to get these, we're going to need, I think, 48 antimatter pellets, which we don't quite have yet, and it will take a lot of power to get. So in the meantime, I've created the module bases we need, and I've got the ultimate induction providers auto crafting, which are just here. These will be ready when the antimatter pellets are, which we only have 7 at the moment. I'll let the power build up, and I might even make another one of these turbines just so that we can improve our power output. Another thing we could do is move straight to DT fuel, which is mixing deuterium and tritium together, and feed that straight in, which should improve the amount of power we output. I decided that would be quite a quick and easy thing to do, so I've set up 3 of these chemical infusers with the tritium and deuterium feeding straight into them. They're making DT fuel, and here it is. If you look at the flux plug, you can see I'm getting almost 200 million FE per tick. Isn't that brilliant? To achieve that, all I did was pop in a few more of these electric pumps for deuterium, and I also added an extra electrolytic separator just to keep that going, and popped a tank there to capture it all. As for tritium, I added a few more of the solar neutron activators as well, and as you can see, they're all full of lithium, so I could probably add more. And I also added some more rotary condensators just to convert the lithium quicker. And again, all into a tank, and that's feeding into the network. And then finally, we'll have a look at our induction matrix. We've got 11.65 TFE at the moment, and we're getting 234 MFE per tick. I think it's safe to say we're good on power for a while. Been such a productive episode. If you've stayed with me all the way through this, I really appreciate it. I've had fun. I hope you guys have. Goodbye for now.